Serving Amherst and Amherst Township, your hometown television station, Amherst City Cable.
To this June 2nd meeting of the Buildings and Lands Committee. We're going to do a roll call real quick here. Mr. Miller.
Present.
Mr. Janik.
Here.
Mr. Venturin.
Here.
Mr. Bukovac.
Here.
Ms. Wasilk.
Here.
All right, I'm here. We have one member absent. Ms.
Move
Wasilk.
to excuse Mr. Goodell from the meeting tonight. He has a letter on file with Mrs. Turley.
Okay, Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
Motion and a second to excuse Mr. Goodell. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone against? It's unanimous, 6-0. We also have all members of the administration here. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we're going to be looking at item A1421. This has to do with a modification to ACO 1341, that's unsafe and insanitary structures. The author of this and is submitted by Building Inspector David McCartney. I'd like to invite him up to speak to us. Thank you.
Good evening, members of council, and to the administration. We had met about a month ago to go over some things with regards to the Lorraine County Land Bank. This was going to be the second half of that, and before we presented it last month, the law department wanted to take one final look at it in review. They did that and got back to me. We made some minor changes to what was in front of you last month, and what you have in front of you at this time is our final revision to that. I had sent out just a brief description of some of the things that we adjusted and changed in that ordinance, which was spelled out in some bullet points. Most of what was contained in the original ordinance, which is also number 1341, was transferred into this one. Basically what we did was consolidate some things, put some things together, update some of the language in the ordinance, and that's how we are presenting it. This would be used most specifically for structures that are, you can make a case to take down or that are in severe disrepair. Most of what we deal with on a daily basis falls under a general property maintenance code, which would be 1342, and that's how we handle most of those. So this would take it that one step further. I will open the floor to any questions.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure that I have the correct copy of A-1421 from that table, but you said you had modifications, and I don't think I have those. Does somebody else have something more than what I'm seeing here? Is this the final modified version? Because I'm looking at kind of peeking the chairs, and I want to make sure that, is this what you're referring to?
Yes, that is, you do have it correct.
Okay. Is this what you're referring to?
Yeah, that was just the bullet points.
Okay, that was the bullet points. So this is the correct one. Very good, thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Anyone else have questions? Mr. Kukuka?
Does this address as well buildings or structures that are under repair for long periods of time?
This would not necessarily pertain to that, although I guess if somebody called and made the question, I would probably handle that in a different way. For something that was this basically goes after something that is a long-term nuisance. If somebody's actively repairing something, we try to work with them to move things along as best we can.
Well, I mean, I guess my question is, there's several buildings around town that, you know, you tell that they started like 8 years ago and they just kind of either gave up or ran out of cash or whatever, and it looks like, you know, they might lay a stone this year and wait 2 more years.
Those things, yeah, we can address those. I wasn't looking at this specifically for that, but that's certainly something we can look at. If there's properties that are, that we have a definite issue with, we can address that.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to say something about that. One of the things that I looked at was you know, what are we generally trying to do in this chapter, and what specific remedies are we creating? And so this incorporates not just those kinds of buildings that need to be condemned or torn down, but it establishes, for example, in section 134102, basic standards for structures. All buildings shall be brought up to basic building standards and fire prevention codes adopted in these ordinances. In 134105, this gives the building inspector a variety of tools to address any number of building issues. A deals with notice to repair. So if somebody's got a building that isn't condemnable but still needs work, he can send out a notice to repair, and there's a process that follows from that. But it also empowers the building inspector to send out other notices. This is in B. Those include the right to barricade a building if it were unsafe, to order that a building be vacated, to demolish the building, or otherwise abate the nuisance. So those are kind of the heavy-duty tools, but to get back to your question, I think if the building inspector felt that if a building was sitting there in a state of disrepair, even though there was some movement to correct the problem, he could still send them a notice to repair or another notice to require them to bring the buildings in to conform with your building standards and fire prevention codes. So I guess that's...
So you're saying yes?
Yes, you can do, yeah. That's a long way, yeah. I just use a lot. Yeah.
Paid by the word.
That's right. You can't live with them, you can't live with them.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Cuckoo?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Ventura?
Are there existing buildings right now that this legislation is going to give you the power to take action on immediately?
As I said, generally speaking, we try to utilize the 1342 just because it's a property maintenance and that's usually the first step. If we have something that's ongoing, then this would give us the tools to address it a little more forcefully. Some of those properties that the whole area has had recently with foreclosures and vacancies, those are kind of fluid. The banks are taking things over. They may get into a sale and then all of a sudden you have homeowners. So that's something that we would address. I've been here for nearly a year and a half and I've never looked at utilizing this particular ordinance because I haven't had to.
Okay.
But the way that we have it written now, it's a little easier to address that situation, but there's not a real big need.
So it's another tool in your toolbox just in case if it comes in.
Correct.
All right, thanks. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Miller?
I think the big question is, for example, on a Crestline, you have a house that needs to be, a lot needs to be done with it. And would this give you the ability to either get the owner to move it, bring it to the ground, or move on with this? Because we have neighbors who should not have to deal with that home.
Yes, this would be a tool for that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Booth?
I'd like to make a motion to take A 1421 before council.
All right. Mr. Miller?
Second, please.
Good. With that, we have a motion and a second. Any other questions? I'll just take a moment here to comment, and that, what I really appreciate about all the work you put into this, remember, is that we have an existing ordinance. The building inspector has taken the time to really update something, and what impressed me, well, it all impresses me, is 1341.01, where he actually quantifies what is an issue. You look at something, you say, oh, this looks bad, but he's got degrees of degrading the foundation, sloping, you know, what percentage of walls are sloping. It really outlines, and it's an interesting page and a half to read. It quantifies, like I said, the things you see, but it makes it very measurable and fair. I like it. It's very well written. Thank you.
I can't take full credit for that, but thank you.
All right. With that, we have a motion, a second, no more questions. We'll put it to a vote. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Ventura?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Ms. Wasilk?
Yes.
I'll vote yes also. With that, it passes 6-0. And to go to the floor of council, excuse me. Okay. Mr. Bukovac?
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn, please.
Mr. Miller?
Second, please.
All right, got a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone against? 6-0. We adjourn at 7:11 p.m.
Our town, our TV. Amherst City Cable.